Welcome to the Right to Reason podcast. I am your host, Robert Stanley. Today we are discussing the topic of mindfulness, which is a bit of a contradiction because mindfulness is wordless. It's meeting the moment as it is, moment after moment after moment, voicelessly attending to our experience as it actually is. It is opening ourselves to not just the fragments of our lives that we like or dislike or view as important, but rather to the whole of our oneness with the universe. So relax, find a quiet place, distance your body and your thoughts from the distractions of this world, and let's practice mindfulness the right way. I mean, we're going to try. This is the Right to Reason podcast.
It's the Right to Reason podcast.
This episode of the Right to Reason podcast is brought to you by our patrons and contributors like me. We have all recognized the value of the unrestrained marketplace of ideas and have decided to make a difference. You can make a difference too. Contribute at patreon.com/right and learn more about your right to reason at therighttoreason.com. Your activism is appreciated.
We're not even the masters of our own lives. We're living in reaction. We're not making real choices.
We don't live in the moment. We live in this guilt over the past and fear of the future.
The power to go through that day in peace is actually within them. Practice is an important word, right? Where it's not necessarily you achieve this discipline. No, now you're a black belt in brain skill. No, but you practice it regularly and you create a habit of mindfulness.
We are driven by avoiding pain and seeking pleasure.
The latest Dalai Lama, who he himself in private is basically downplaying quite a bit of the mysticism of Buddhism itself and really playing up the scientific evidence on the neurological level that mindfulness practice can cause in terms of changing the actual brain and the motor neurons themselves.
It might not be supernatural necessarily, but people are having, real experiences.
Are we talking about completely solving emotional turmoil altogether?
It's the opposite of making me numb. It's made me feel more alive, more awake, more present in my life, more engaged, have more energy, less stress.
That's it, man.
No, man, that's the most.
I'm even tearing up a little bit talking about it. I'm thinking about it.
I am too. I am too.
Just say, I want to create more freedom and live a fuller life. This is, I found, to be one of the most powerful ways, gifts, to go about doing that.
There are times when you simply must stop thinking. Well, how do you do that? The first rule is don't try to. Because if you do, you will be like someone trying to make rough water smooth with a flat iron. And all that will do will stir it up. So, in the same way as a muddy, turbulent pool quiets itself when left alone, you have to know how to leave your mind alone. It will quiet itself.
So, not the best day. You wake up a little bit late. You kind of snooze a little bit because you didn't go to bed as early as you should have the night before. Maybe you had a couple too many drinks. Maybe you crammed some fast food down your throat. Now you just don't have the energy to get started. You're running late for work. You're in traffic. People are cutting you off. You kind of try to hang back just for defensive driving's sake, but you just see all these people just flying in and out. Finally, you get to work. It's a stressful day. Just nothing seems to be clicking for you. You got a million Post-it notes pasted all over your cubicle or whatever profession you might have, however that might apply. You have to get groceries right after work. You're standing there in line. You're hearing that boop, boop, boop. It's driving you crazy. Everybody looks miserable. You finally get home and your kid is dealing with back to school stuff. It's something that a lot of parents are going through right now. I got to get the right cleats because he's in sports, or I got to get the right paperwork signed because they just started some kind of class for English or whatever. Maybe you and the spouse are going through something and you're getting a little bit of a tiff and you're just stressed out. I feel like this is something that the listener experiences probably more often than they would like, and they probably don't have the tools, or perhaps they're not aware that tools exist to be able to deal with just basic life stuff. I mean, we're not even talking about crises that might occur where this application of mindfulness would be so appropriate and so useful. Today, we're joined with Andrew Jasko from lifeafterdogma.org and Michael Moore, an occupational therapist. Gentlemen, I'm so happy to be talking to both of you.
Good to be here.
Great to be here.
Michael, your name comes up more often in my life than you know. In fact, speaking of the grocery store, I was grabbing Hot Pockets and sandwich meats and whatever for the kids for school starting up, and I come across a lady, and she's a psychologist. And I mentioned, oh, well, it's funny that's your profession. I know someone that's an occupational therapist, and I'm not really sure of his profession. I think he just helps depressed people with their job problems. And she kind of laughed. She's like, oh, my God, that profession is very important. Do not say that. Give us a quick rundown of what occupational therapy actually entails and how much I really got it wrong.
Oh, my God. It's a profession that started at the turn of the century. It segued off from nursing after World War I. What had happened is the soldiers came back from World War I just emotionally, mentally, and physically devastated. And a whole other branch of nursing started as a type of physical therapy and emotional therapy and occupational therapy to give the soldiers something to do to make them whole again. And then from that, it became all these different professions such as physical therapy, occupational therapy, and even music therapy for a while was actually under the umbrella of occupational therapy. So occupational therapists actually perform in a wide range of fields and domains of practice. For example, we spoke before, I worked for 10 years for the Detroit Public Schools working with children with disabilities, primarily autism, attention deficit disorder, children with psychiatric problems. I've worked in traumatic brain injury clinics. I've worked in rehabilitation clinics. Currently now I'm working with geriatrics in the home, status post discharge from the hospital with Parkinson's dystonia, with motor problems, degenerative neurological disorders, and things like that. And what am I doing necessarily? Well, I'm doing a whole range of activities that could be ranging from basically modified exercise programs to restore function so they have greater accessibility over activities of self-care, such as bathing, toileting, and dressing, things that we take for granted on a daily basis, that when you lose the ability to do, you feel dehumanized, you feel weak, you feel helpless. And so empowering people to just dress themselves and toilet themselves and showering themselves and stand up and move allows them to get back to some type of life, to feel like a human being again. So that's in essence kind of what I do, but it's just, it can change specifically as per the needs of the patient. So occupational therapists tend to be these jack of all trades. You have to be very creative. You have to have a very creative background. You have to have a lot of energy, as I've found, which works out for me.
I'd be curious to hear how mindfulness is a useful tool in your occupation, and I want to get to that a little bit later. But just
Sure.
Before that, Andrew Jasko, lifeafterdogma.org. You help people kind of get out of the funk and the mire and the trauma of their previous spiritualism, right? Or at least the religion that seemed to propagate from spiritualism, and give them a new concept of spirituality. Is that a fair description?
Something like that.
Okay.
So I used to be a minister, got my Master of Divinity, was a preacher, did some missionary work in India. Before I deconverted, I came out of that religion because I found it to be severely psychologically traumatizing. Gave me an anxiety disorder, all kinds of forms of agony, really. But I ended up becoming an atheist and then having a lot of what are known as spiritual experiences. So I'm interested in interreligious dialogue, really dialoguing with people with whatever ideology they identify with, and looking into those experiences that some people call mystical or some people call just human experiences, and trying to find some common language and make sense of some of it. People within these religious frameworks, I'm interested in working with them. I'm working with some Christians right now to help expand some of the dogma, break free, bring some more healing as far as some of the really traumatic, controlling, oppressive doctrines, and open up a little more space for some more free spiritual or human experience, whatever you want to call it. I don't really care that much. So I blog and write a lot about all these topics. So on the one hand, I'm a heavy critic of a lot of religion. On the other, I have no problem using the language and symbols of the Bible or any religious phrase if I find it applicable or useful.
Andrew, if someone were to Google mindfulness, they would get a definition that says, a mental state achieved by focusing one's awareness on the present moment while calmly acknowledging and accepting one's feelings, thoughts, and bodily sensations. It's also used as a common therapeutic technique. I feel like that kind of falls short from what you and Michael might describe mindfulness as, that's just kind of this a blanket definition, as it were. Can you give us your definition of mindfulness and how we can use it in our day-to-day lives?
So mindfulness is the practice of bringing awareness to the reality of life as it actually is in the present moment to decrease suffering and increase well-being.
Very good.
We go through our lives mostly on autopilot. We're not actually making real decisions most of the time. Most of our decisions are actually reactions. We have an outside stimulus, whatever it is, maybe your wife or your boss is yelling at you, maybe you're in traffic, or maybe it's just your own thoughts are harassing you. And we just react automatically. You might react by screaming back at the other person or getting in a car accident or whatever it is. 95+% maybe, and I'm just making this number up, but it's really high, of the decisions we make come from our programming, our past experiences, our early childhood experiences, our societal conditioning. And we're not very aware as human beings in general. So mindfulness is about becoming aware by bringing non-judgmental awareness into your day-to-day life. So whatever it is you're doing, whether you're going grocery shopping or you're working or you're walking or eating, mindful eating, you're bringing your focus and your attention to your activity, being fully involved in the activity of your present moment. We spend so much of our lives not actually living in our experience. Our minds go all over the place. We'll go into the future, worrying and planning about the future, or into the past, escaping the present moment. And what that does is it not only makes us very inefficient, it makes us very, very miserable.
Very good.
Yeah, so a lot of this has to do with ignorance. We are not very aware in general of what's happening. And more than that, we tend to be slaves to our own minds. Our minds are out of control. They're just gone mad and wild. And so for me, it's really difficult to have mindfulness without meditation or some kind of meditation practice, because it's through the meditation that you learn how to be mindful. When you're sitting and paying attention to your breath or your body through various techniques of concentration, you're going to find your mind and your emotions going haywire on you and just going all over the place. And it's like, I can't get a single second of peace here before my mind goes to the grocery shopping or that person I'm angry about. And so we find that we're not even the masters of our own lives. We're living in reaction. We're not making real choices. We're moving so quickly throughout our lives, and we're controlled by our minds. We have no ability to pause or slow them down or to make conscious choices because we've never really tamed our minds.
Yeah. And actually, I do not think it's a small point to bring attention to the moment, because I'd like to underscore something that Andrew actually did emphasize, and emphasize it even more, is the fact that we don't live in the moment. We live in this guilt over the past and fear of the future. And so much of that does intrude upon our present state. We're constantly having to worry about what we're going to do next, what's happening here, what's going on there. And the moments that we actually do spend in the present were usually spent distracting ourselves, whether it's a movie, TV, cell phone, or whatever, addiction, so forth and so on of the modern world that allows us that. And so just simply bringing attention to what our body's doing in the moment and focusing on it, breathing is very, very important. We actually can actually change our vital signs. We can change our heart rate. We can change our breathing. We can change very, very important things. And that's what got me into teaching that to my patients, is to address issues of anxiety and depression and things like that. That Andrew really said it quite eloquently. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, actually, Mike, could you expound on that a little bit, just to let us know, like, how this has been applicable to helping others?
I can talk about how it helped myself growing up. I suffered myself from just a horrible state of depression, where I had this tremendous guilt over the past and just tremendous fear over the future. And I went into therapy. And in therapy, I was lucky enough to have some really good therapists, and I started doing a lot of reading on the matter. And I did get into transcendental Zen meditation, and I did get into Gestalt therapy. Just a tremendous amount of other reading of Erich Fromm's book, To Have or To Be. It's a bit antiquated by today's standards and a bit academic. It doesn't really translate into the 21st century that well. But for me, it was the idea to address my own severe depression. I was being treated many years with antidepressants and not having much luck. And I finally saw one doctor, and he said, I'm throwing up my hands, and I think we need to go with shock therapy. And
really?
And yeah, really. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to suffer anymore. I had enough being tormented and tormenting myself. And I started to study Zen Buddhism and Taoism, and just studying not so much the religions or Eastern religion, but just Eastern practices. And very quickly, meditation was really the only thing that helped. It was the only thing that brought peace. And it was just like a eureka moment. And I certainly at that point did shirk off any Western type of religiosity and began to really get into that Eastern sensibility but the practical sense about it, really no mysticism involved for myself. And actually, to go back up a little bit, mindfulness and the concept of mindfulness is really coming from transcendental meditation. It was really brought to the West in the 70s, and in California and Berkeley, for example. I forget the gentleman's name. He was a psychologist, and he really just stripped away the mysticism of it and started teaching it as a form of rehabilitation to people with depression, as a form of psychotherapy.
The analogy that I offered of, you're having a rough day, you wake up a little late,
Yeah.
you might not have made the best choices the night before, you're late for work, or you're stressed out, there's traffic, then you got to deal with the grocery store, then you got to deal with the kids or the spouse. I feel like a lot of people go through a day like that and just kind of go, oh, well, I have to self-medicate. I have to be dependent on marijuana or alcohol or on nighttime television, something that can kind of just cascade me out
Distract
of being
you off your present modern day health. Yeah.
Sure. And while I don't want to discourage anyone from trying to help themselves in their own way, I feel like they are unaware that the power to go through that day in peace is actually within them. And even in the moment of a stressful situation, that they can be at peace with a healthy practice. And practice is an important word, right? Where it's not necessarily you achieve this discipline. No, now you're a black belt in brain skill. No, but you practice it regularly and you create a habit of mindfulness. Could you guys kind of let us know how we can achieve this peace?
Practice, practice, practice. So let me explain a little bit how I got into this. I have really a similar story in that I struggled for years with debilitating anxiety, and I was taking Klonopin, an anxiety medication, for 11 years. I saw a class being offered called Anxiety and Meditation, and I thought, I'd never want to do meditation. I'm the worst candidate for meditation. If there's anyone who's a poor candidate, I can't sit still for a second. My mind is going a million miles an hour. This sounds like torture. You guys can go do your Zen thing. I'm cool over here being active. So I sat through this course and I started sitting down watching my mind, and I said, this is horrible. This is so boring. I hate this. And the teacher said, good. That's the point.
Oh, wow.
And so the thing about meditation is it's not about having a pleasant or an unpleasant experience. And this gets into a little bit of Buddhist philosophy, which I actually want to say something about the Buddhism and religion thing. We tend to conceive of Buddhism and even a lot of Hinduism as a religion, and some of it is, but a lot of it isn't. Because the two frameworks went together. So for people, for philosophers, for scientists who were doing this for thousands of years, they weren't necessarily separate things, or a lot of Buddhists don't consider it a religion at all. They consider it a philosophy and psychology of mind. And in fact, they're kind of apathetic about a deity or whatever you believe about it. They just basically say, it doesn't matter. We don't care. Do your meditation practice, focus on the path. So we do ourselves a disservice if we kind of just approach it the same way we approach the religions we're familiar with. And I think it's important to examine their own assumptions and what they say about their own beliefs. So that being said, what is taught is that we are in a miserable condition. We live in a state of suffering and misery, and that's because of primarily what goes on in our own minds. Most of the suffering we experience takes place in our mind, and we act that out in the world. And the suffering in the world is a result of the suffering and unresolved trauma in people's minds. And we are driven by avoiding pain and seeking pleasure. Most of our decisions, we're either running away from pain, saying, what can I do to get rid of this painful situation? I don't like it. Or I want this thing. It will make me happy. I felt good when I had this car or this person in my life. I need that thing. And that cycle of craving and aversion, both are painful states to be in. If you're driven by a reaction to pain and pleasure, your peace is unstable. It's an unstable way to live because everything is impermanent. Another teaching is impermanence. Everything, matter and mind, arises and passes away. No emotion, no thought, however pleasant or unpleasant, stays forever. And so by learning through observing your breath or meditation or mindfulness to just calmly observe your pleasurable thoughts or your painful thoughts and emotions and body sensations without judging them, without trying to make them go away, we start to detach from them and not make a big deal of them, and then be able to make wise decisions to live a proper life instead of just being in reaction. My metric of how well I'm doing in my meditation practice is actually how I react in traffic. It's funny you mentioned that because if I'm in a traffic situation and I'm losing my peace, I'm getting all angry over something I can't control, what's the point of that? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Why
would I lose my peace? Or if someone is coming at me abusively and yelling at me, why would I receive that gift? I'd rather return it to sender and say, hey, that's your thing. You can keep it. I'm going to keep my peace. But we're unable to do this because we have these traumas inside of us and because we're so accustomed to these patterns of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. And so meditation helps to cultivate these qualities so you can actually have this deeper peace. It's not that we don't experience pleasure or don't experience pain, but we're not controlled by them. We're not dominated by them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I couldn't agree more. Matter of fact, I remember reading a couple books, one of which was quoting the latest Dalai Lama, who he himself in private is basically downplaying quite a bit of the mysticism of Buddhism itself and really playing up the scientific evidence on the neurological level that mindfulness practice can cause in terms of changing the actual brain and the motor neurons themselves.
So it's interesting. I don't know if I mentioned, but I'm getting my doctorate in clinical psychology. Oh, really? So this is kind of my field, what I'm working with and studying a lot of is including the mystical aspects. I find that often a lot of what is labeled mysticism is just poorly understood. And, there could be something real going on there. It might not be supernatural necessarily, but people are having, real experiences. The whole idea of enlightenment, I didn't think much of until recently. And I actually just got back from a Vipassana retreat, a 10-day silent meditation retreat, 10 hours a day meditating, which...
How long were you actually silent?
We were silent the whole time. No reading, no writing,
for
no
10
talking.
Days?
Yeah, except we could talk to instructors for questions, for interviews. But besides that, it was total silence.
What is that? That's got to be bizarre.
It was... I mean, I'll tell you what, I feel like I have a completely new mind. It's crazy. And I feel like I processed decades of trauma and healing in just those 10 days. Jesus. It's incredible. It's the most powerful thing, also probably the most challenging thing I've ever done. But so the idea of enlightenment is very interesting to me. because I think it describes something that people really experience, maybe not in those terms necessarily. There's a book called The Finders by Jeffrey Martin, and he did this qualitative study of people all around the world, different religions, atheists, who had achieved this state of what he calls fundamental well-being. And it seems to be a thing where people describe basically the critical mind kind of becoming silent, basically being in an enduring state of peace, of having their traumas for the most part entirely resolved. So they're not being reactive anymore, and they're just acting out of a place of awareness, compassion, love, and abiding peace. So it does seem to me that there are these higher stages in human development and psychological actualization that are something like what people were groping at with terms like enlightenment, that they actually exist. It's very fascinating research.
Let me ask you guys a question. And I know this isn't exactly what you're referring to. I'm going to the extreme, okay? But people appreciate brackets, right? They like thinking that, okay, I am at 0. You're telling me that I could be at 5. But 20's freaking crazy, right? So, like, if someone is so skilled at mindfulness, say that they are like what I was referring to in, in a humorous way about, like, I'm a black belt in mindfulness, right? Could this person go through some kind of trauma, like, let's say a loss of a child or a significant loved one, and totally be numb, totally not feel any suffering at all? To kind of bracket this and put it in some kind of pragmatic, understandable way where people can say, like, okay, it's not like a cure-all, but I can see that it would benefit me in certain traumatic scenarios or just regular life scenarios. Are we talking about completely solving emotional turmoil altogether?
No, it's not about that, and it's certainly not about being numb. If anything, I'm more empathic and loving than I could have possibly ever imagined. I now feel I have the capacity for, at the risk of sounding like a hippie, I feel like I've got the capacity for real sort of mature human love. I actually tell my male friends now I love them when they leave and things like that now. And I have no fear of judgment and a lot of other kind of normal sort of adolescent fears that I think toxic masculinity gives us in our culture. I think I've been able to sort of really shun and sort of put in my past. I can easily be toppled off my horse, as Sam Harris, alludes to it at times, but I can get back down. I think having a mindfulness practice is when you are being pushed off your horse of self-calm, you know how to get back on. You have a way of self-calming, of dealing with yourself, of dealing with the moment, of self-righting. And I think that's the important thing to realize. I'm human. I have a human monkey brain, and I have those hormones, and I have all those other things. But I've got now there's like a deeper, real self now that has control over things. Sam Harris's book, Free Will, is a book I definitely recommend for people. And in there, he has a sentence, and I thought he touched on something really, really important. He says, at best, we're a puppet that can get a hold of his strings, or its strings, rather. And I think that's what mindfulness training really has given me. At the end of the day, I feel like I've got a way to get a hold of my strings, to get back on that horse, to get back on a path of caring, empathy, love, kindness for my fellow man and myself as well. Can't forget that.
Of course.
That's really well said. And you hit at one of the most common misconceptions of Buddhism and mindfulness and meditation in general, is that it makes you numb, or it makes you not desire things anymore. Like, what happens if you're not attached to your desire? You just don't want things anymore? Well, I would say it's the opposite of making me numb. It's made me feel more alive, more awake, more present in my life, more engaged, have more energy, less stress, and more appreciation for the small things. Like, I even notice things like feeling the wind on my body, or just like things in the moment that you wouldn't even be aware of, being so caught up in your mind, having a greater appreciation. It really is very life-changing, I think, for most people who practice it, really. I think when you cultivate a practice, you do reach different stages for sure as you mature, and you will find that certain things might not even bother you anymore that used to. But a lot of the times it's just like, oh, I'm caught in this anger and frustration for 10 minutes when it would have been 10 hours before, or it's like, now that I'm angry, I actually become aware that I'm having this reaction and thought process, and I'm able to pause and catch it because I was paying attention to my emotions and thoughts in my breath. Now in my life, I'm like, oh, this is that thing again. There's another option, and I can actually have the capacity to let go of that and have more freedom and space. So we're human beings where we have emotions, we have our reactions, but then it's also it's honestly a very rational, realistic. It's a realist perspective. So it's not about trying to be positive, or it's not about trying not to be negative. It's accepting reality as it is, not as you want it to be. And not if you're being negative or hateful or whatever, it's not about judging that. It's becoming aware of it. It's saying, okay, I'm engaging in this addictive habit right now. Instead of trying to make myself feel guilty and make it worse, and I'm just going to observe it, be aware of it, try not to judge it. And that kind of breaks the power of that thing. People and many studies have observed when you're able to not put on another layer of suffering on top of the suffering that's already taking place.
Yeah, so often people do that to themselves. People just destroy themselves over guilt, sin, shame, and alienation. And it's painful to watch. And it was painful to be a part of it. My dear father died that way, and it's painful. I mean, he was a lovely man, and yet he just ate himself from the inside out. And I couldn't stop it.
Okay, enough preliminaries. Let's get down to brass tacks. We're talking to Susan or Megan or Joe. They're in their car right now. They're worried about bills. Maybe one of them has some medical issue that's coming up right now. They're worried about a procedure. They've got stress. They've got anxiety. There's a lot of stuff working against them. What's the trick? What's the first thing they need to do? And then the follow-up after that, how do they really engage in mindfulness right now, pragmatically?
The one thing I would start with everybody, and I've started with my friends, is part of, I think, mindfulness is also too an attitude about gratefulness. Being grateful for what you have. It sounds cheesy, it sounds cliche, but studies have shown and research has shown that sitting down every day and listing 5 things you're grateful for greatly reduces anxiety and depression as much as some low-dose pharmaceutical drugs. So the mere act of sitting down and physically listing those things, and I did this. This was part of my practice years and years ago, and this is how I started to kind of realize that these practices are actually more important than taking drugs. Is just be grateful that you have the ability to get in a car and move. Have that physical ability. And one of the things that ironically helped me with my depression is I was working with children with disabilities when I was at some of my most lowest points. And I was shocked one day that how dare I feel this way when I've got this child in front of me who has this disability. I've got to really get my I've got to get my shit together to help them. And that was really one of the ways. I really have to say that at that point in time it saved my life. I probably could have become this easily this self-loathing, really pathetic human being, and might have even committed suicide. And I have to say that working with children saved me, because it really forced me to be grateful for what I had, and then that was enough of a handhold in that mountain to climb and pull myself up to a sense of self-peace. Eventually, it wasn't easy, but it eventually I come out there.
That might just be the most goddamn beautiful thing I ever heard, Mike.
That's awesome.
Jesus, I mean, it's such a cliche, like 1980s white lady helps the black urban students, and she learns how to dance, and then she tells them that
it really was. And I have to say it's true. I'm not exaggerating, but it's true. I'm sorry. That's it, man.
No, man. That's the most amazing.
I'm even tearing up a little bit talking about it. I'm thinking about it.
I am too. I am too. I mean, be grateful for what you have, and B, turn around and try to help somebody else. And know you're going to be imperfect, and of course you will be sloppy, and of course it's a mess. But it helps you. Realize that you're in this together and you're not alone. Reach out to somebody. I routinely, today I was able to do it today. I was so happy. A fellow therapist was having a rough time. She's a young Indian woman from India.
and I think she was having a cultural struggle as well. And I took 30 minutes out of my day, and I stopped and I says, okay, Mel, what's going on? And I was like, number one, listen, I'm here for you. If you need anything, let me know. And then I started just talking to you. You need to relax. You need to just realize, and then we had a realistic conversation about the trials and tribulations of the medical industry and what we have to deal with. And I says, listen, man, when you're in the home and with the patient, you're there to just ease suffering, ease their pain. Listening is an act of love. And I just kind of gave her this sort of pep talk, and I said, everything's going to be fine. We're going to get through this. We're together, and we're a team.
Andrew, how do we get started with this?
So I recommend to everyone to take a class. And here's why. You will probably find that there are Buddhist centers or meditation centers in your area. They're probably all pretty good. You're going to find roughly the same thing. They're probably not going to talk about religion, honestly. So if you're looking for religion, you're going to be disappointed. They focus mostly on the meditation practice, and they'll have intro to meditation courses. And so that allows you to get instruction. I think the instruction and the philosophy is really essential to understanding why the practice is important and how to go about it, how to answer your questions, to find support from other people who are doing it. Because it's not enough, I find, for people to generally to have and maintain a practice by just saying, I want to do this, I'm just going to do this on my own. So number one, find a class. I mean, half the time they're free. Go to it and learn how to develop a practice. I recommend getting to I think 20 minutes a day, honestly, is a good number. I mean, do whatever you can, right? Anything is better than nothing. But I found for me that really start reaping the benefits of it and being able to go in more deeply after 15 or 20 minutes or so. That's been my experience. Everyone has a different experience. But really the teaching is essential, but it's all about the practice. I mean, it's not possible to hear about the principles of mindfulness and then be able to be mindful in your life, really, on any deep level without doing the practice. And I think our educational system has done us a disservice in that it's tended to focus a lot on just being intellectual, on understanding things cognitively, not as much on the practice, on the emotional aspects of life. And this is one where it really is all about the practical, on getting in there, and where you learn most of the lessons from doing the practice.
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more with that last point about the educational system, by the way. Thank you.
Yeah. And I wanted to plug this Vipassana thing too. I just had this amazing experience going on this 10-day meditation retreat. It's called Vipassana meditation. It's actually the technique that the Gautama Buddha, the historical figure, taught. And it stood out to him among hundreds or thousands of other techniques because it works on the mind-body connection. So this course is absolutely free. It's donation-based. They offer them around the United States. It's a lot. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life, but also the most rewarding. It was like a major intensive mind surgery. This technique, you do body scans. You focus on sensations going up and down your whole body and deepen that mind-body connection. And what they found is that type of concentration has a way of reaching the depths of the unconscious mind, the deepest parts of the mind, and kind of bringing up the traumas and patterning to the surface of your mind and releasing them. And I found that to be the case. I was just processing a ton of memories, decades of trauma, things I'd forgotten. They were coming to the surface. And I was repatterning the way my mind works. I feel like I'm a new person, just the way that I'm not reacting to pain as much. I'm not obsessing or worrying as much. It's a really amazing gift, I think, and it's worth knowing about. I'll send you the link there, just for people who are interested in really, really going in deep into this kind of a practice.
Something I would recommend too, and something I did experiments with. I shouldn't say I did experiments with school children, but because that sounds funny. But I had when I was working. Yeah, I know. When I was working with school-age children, and with attention deficit disorder, but using like a reward system and having them sit with a clock and focus on their breathing for just a minute, I actually saw over a period of weeks some very traumatic results with children. We forget that our school age children now are just in this whirlwind of environmental stimuli. I'm almost 50, and I remember growing up in the 70s where I had all this free time with no television. And children nowadays are just always with a screen and always entertained. And it's like we're creating this brain to have attention deficit disorder. We're exacerbating these problems with environmental behaviors and stimuli. And just having people sit down for a minute in a quiet room and focus on their breathing, just in and of itself, a couple minutes can just do a world of difference. So I would recommend people just begin to sit down and do that. And if they feel like they can do more than a few minutes, then do more than a few minutes. But just taking a few minutes and doing that can make a world of difference.
Mm-hmm. Children tend to adhere to the concepts of mindfulness even easier than adults do, in the same way like they can pick up new languages easier than we can. And
they do.
Mindfulness has been shown to be incredibly powerful in treating mental health issues like depression and anxiety and all kinds of stress, which also relates to health issues in the body, chronic disease, things like that, but also drug addiction. And for those whom that is an issue, there are mindfulness-based recovery groups all over the U.S., alternatives to, the religious-based 12-step program. They're really effective.
Very good. Yeah, good plug.
We tolerate so much misery that happens in our lives and in our own minds needlessly, and we don't have to. Just because we're not aware that it exists, it's often this low-level buzzing, this low-level emotional pain and mental cycling, or we're not aware that there's a way out. And at the end of the day, we live with our own minds. You can get away from all the people in your life. You can move to Thailand or wherever and try to start over, but you can't escape your own mind. And so I think this is just an amazing tool if you're sick of some of that suffering, just say, I want to create more freedom and live a fuller life. This is, I found, to be one of the most powerful ways, gifts to go about doing that.
Yeah, a person's experience of time itself is a very subjective one, and it's heavily influenced by their emotional state. So fears and insecurities about the past and the future make it difficult to fully enjoy the present. And so this practice enables one to fully immerse themselves in the present and find a deeper level of connection with themselves, their environment, and the people around them.
We've been talking to Andrew Jasko at lifeafterdogma.org. Andrew, thank you so much for your time today.
And a pleasure.
Michael Moore, could you close us out today with an opportunity for the listener to practice meditation themselves right now? Just a short experiment of just how beneficial looking inward, instead of just focusing so much on the outward, looking inward might be.
What I think is beneficial to impart to people is how much anxiety and their daily life, they lose track of their breathing, and they lose track of healthy, natural, deep breaths. And so the patients and the people I deal with have undergone some type of insult to their bodies and to the nervous system. And so what I would ask someone to do, if they could, sit in a comfortable chair, something like a comfortable kitchen chair, straight up as possible, fold their arms as if they're giving themselves a hug, and take a deep breath as if they're pushing out at their belt line, their belly. So you have to let your vanity go. We walk around with all this vanity to hold in our gut, and it just upsets our breathing and throws off, and actually triggers our amygdala to be a little bit more on guard and have a little bit more sense of insecurity and self-hatred. And so if they could just let their gut go and let their stomach stick out and take a deep breath. And as they do that, lean over to the side and take a deep breath in, and then push the breath out as they come to center. And then lean over to the other side and breathe in and let the air fill in, the diaphragm drop, and the waistline expand. And then as they return to center, breathe out and push that out. Feel the abdominal muscles. Get a hold of that breath from the very depth of your abdominal floor, and then come to center and let your breathing return to normal. And this is the practice that I've worked with patients with Alzheimer's and dementia and Parkinson's in the early stages, because those types of neurological cues actually create a sense of shallow breathing as well as just abnormal musculature.
I was actually doing it while you were saying that. That's very cool.
Go very slowly. Go very, very slowly. Lean over as far as you can. Breathe in nice and deep. Blow out as you come to center. Then breathe in. Lean over to the other side. Blow out as you come to center. And then relax. It's an exercise that I pieced together a few things I learned when I studied vocal performance and when I studied Pilates. It's something I pieced together about 10 years ago, or maybe closer to 15 years ago, when I started working with people in rehab clinics, TBI clinics with Parkinson's.
Amazing that, like, while you're describing this, and I'm following along with you while you're kind of leading me through this process, I get this mental image of a Native American shaman, right? An early mystic, as it were, just kind of swaying back and forth like a reed in the wind. And we as skeptics, atheists, agnostics, we look at that and we mock it. But it's amazing how much ancient wisdom perhaps we've lost. Or, perhaps it was convoluted, contaminated with, horrible kind of dogmatic thinking. And I think this is maybe where Andrew focuses his attention, is helping people out of that part, but not losing the spiritual and historical significance.
That's really important. I'm really glad Andrew's doing that. Yeah, I mean, I myself have sort of reconnected with some of my Native American roots. I've always been a big fan of, I don't know if you guys are hip to John Trudell at all, Native American poet.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah. So I've rediscovered, I mean, I was into him a long time ago, and then really recently got back into a lot of his writing and poetry and everything, and just I really find that very, very, very helpful as well.
Andrew Jasko, lifeafterdogma.org, thank you so much for your time. And Michael Moore, I really enjoyed that moment that you just gave us, that you shared with us. I felt that deeply, and I appreciate both of you coming on the show today.
Great, thank you.
It's been a blast, Andrew. It's been a blast meeting you and speaking with you. It's been a
great to meet you, Michael.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you to Michael and Andrew. Thank you to Dave Blair at davefreesong.com/free music. Thank you to our patrons. You can also support this broadcast at patreon.com/right and learn more at therighttoreason.com. Next week, we're asking the question, has comedy gone too far? The guest joining us for that conversation will be Eric Ryder from the Odd Atheist Friends, Ben Fama Jr. from Reality Trip, Brent Lee from Unapologetics, Objectively Dan from Truth Wanted, and Seamus from the Free Thought Prophet. I'll be playing offensive comedy bits and seeing how triggered I can get them. That's next week. Between now and then, remember that you have the right to reason.
This has been the Right to Reason podcast.
No, I can't say that.
They say I've got the right to reason, but I say, go fuck yourself.
No. All right. I want the Right to Reason podcast inside of me.
Hey there, this is Damian Lee Thor from Predator. The Right to Reason rocks.
Hey, this is Seamus from the Free Thought Prophet. I have the right to reason, motherfucker.
The Right to Reason podcast is not necessarily horrible.
The Right to Reason podcast. It grew into my life, but I still like it.
Hey, this is Michael Moore, and I can honestly say this was the worst interview I've ever had.
El derecho a razonar es lo máximo.
Is it recording right now? All right.
This has been the Right to Reason podcast.
This podcast is kind of stupid, but not horrible. My dad won't let me listen to this podcast because of the incessant use of profanity, like and.
You have been listening to the Right to Reason.
I can't sing the next one. Moist. This broadcast makes me moist. This broadcast makes me moist. This broadcast makes me so moist.
You have serious mental issues. I just want to throw that out there.
Funny.
No.